So the first step is the buyer's response. They have a few options. The buyer could say, I've inspected the property and approved the inspection. We're happy with everything, and we've waived our contingency. There's nothing else that needs to happen after that. It's simply a notice from the buyer to the seller that everything's good and we're moving on. The second one would be the buyer's inspection of the property is disapproved. So we've done the inspection, found something they didn't like, changed their minds, but they have decided we're not moving forward based on this inspection. We're terminating the contract. So that's option number 2. Anytime there's a termination in the contract that says the contract will be terminated, some action and then it'll be terminated, it will address what happens to the earnest money. So you'll see on the second checkbox here that it says the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. So it's pretty clear in most forms. If you terminate it in this step, what happens to that earnest money? Questions on those first two? All right, next one is buyer gives notice of additional inspections. So on the Form 35, you negotiate your inspection period, then you also negotiate your additional inspection period, which would give the buyer some additional time to do further inspections if it's recommended by the inspector. So we have to make sure that we have a recommendation from the original home inspector to do additional inspections. Then you would use this form, checkbox 3, and that would then activate that additional inspection period. Remember, it used to be that in order for us to take advantage of that additional inspection period, we had to send that recommendation from the inspector to the seller with this form. That is not the case anymore. We do not send that recommendation because it is considered part of the inspection report, and we cannot send any portion of the inspection report without seller's first written request. So that it used to be the one exception. It's not anymore. So don't send that, but make sure you have it, because if the seller requests it, then you need to be able to send it.
Camden, can I ask a question?
You bet. I love questions.
So what happens if the buyer did their own inspection? So there's no additional report asking for additional inspections, but they decide they want to have some kind of expert come out there.
Great question. So they can bring a specialist out during the initial inspection period. That is an option. If they need to use the additional inspection period, they'd have to write their own recommendation.
Okay.
I recommend that a roofer inspect the roof. Having a buyer do their own is kind of interesting, because really they could have no reason and write a reason to have a specialist come out. But you do have that option in the initial inspection period if you can get one out in that time. I think that's probably the biggest challenge. Then, so we've talked about the first 3. Option 4 is probably the most commonly used, one of the most commonly used, and that is that the buyer is going to request some modifications or repairs.